Today's video is the second video in my series where I wire up my new house for networking, smart home, multi-room audio and all that sort of stuff. In my previous video, we talked about my plans and figured out all the cable routes we'll need to run all these cables. So in today's video, we're going to follow up that by actually running all the new cables into the house. So we'll get all these cables installed, run them from the garage to all the relevant rooms, and then in the next video, we'll talk about actually terminating them all and connecting them up to all the networking equipment. So yeah, time to run all these cables, and it's going to be a bit of an epic job. So as I mentioned in my previous video, the plan is to run all these cables from the garage to all the relevant rooms. So they'll all run from the garage up through the garage ceiling, and they'll either branch off through the upstairs floor to drop down into all the downstairs rooms, or they'll carry on through an upstairs cupboard up into the attic and then drop down into all the upstairs rooms. So in the previous video, I already figured out all the cable routes to get the cables to downstairs. So I drilled a bunch of holes in the floors, drilled a bunch of joists, and I figured out all the routes that I need to get all the cables through to get the cables to all the downstairs rooms. Since that video, I've opened up a few more access holes, drilled all the holes in the joists, and I now have complete access from the garage through to all the rooms that I need to run the cables to. I may need to open up a few access holes here and there if I run into any issues or decide to run in any extra points as I'm doing this, but we've basically got all the access that we need for downstairs. However, for upstairs, in my previous video I mentioned I want to run all the cables through an upstairs cupboard in trunking, and then through the attic in cable basket. So before we actually start running the cables, let's jump upstairs and take a look at what we'll be doing there, get all the containment installed, and then once that's done, we can actually do the fun part and run the cables. So now here I am in the upstairs cupboard where I'll be installing all the trunking to bring all the cables through the floor from the garage, up through the cupboard and up into the attic. So as you can see now, I've bought the trunking I'll be using. So I've got two lengths of 50 by 100 maxi trunking, so it's quite big trunking. So I'll be running two lengths of this from here, from the garage, all the way up through the cupboard and up into the attic. This will allow me just to split out the types of cables I'm running into a couple of different pieces of trunking. I don't really need to explicitly separate them for any reason, nor do I really need the additional space of the second length of trunking, but I didn't want to be getting anything tight or struggling to fit anything in. I just wanted to have loads of space, especially for running cable runs in the future. So I may as well have two decent lengths of trunking just to give me all that space to get all my cables up into the attic. On top of that, I'm also going to be installing this smaller, I think it's 38 by 25 trunking. I'll run this alongside this trunking with a bit of a gap, and this will be for carrying any mains cables that I need from the garage up into the attic. Just to keep it separate from all the data and speaker and all that kind of stuff. Initially, this is going to be carrying a smoke alarm feed, because currently there's no smoke alarm in the attic or the garage. Now, I want a smoke alarm in the attic because the solar inverter is up there, so I want something up there to keep an eye on that. And whereas you normally would put a smoke alarm in a garage because you'd have cars in there with exhaust fumes, my garage is never going to have a car in it, but instead it's going to have a lot of networking equipment and electrical stuff running 24/7. So I want a smoke alarm in there as well. So my plan with this trunking is to put a smoke alarm up in the attic that I can come off of the upstairs smoke alarm to feed that one. Then I can come off the attic smoke alarm, feed the cable down this trunking and then into the garage and install a smoke alarm in there and have them all hardwired and interlinked. And what I might do in the future, although that would probably be another video, is I might also install a relay base attached to the interlink connection on the smoke alarm, and that could then integrate into the alarm system where the alarm panel will be installed in the garage, so that if the smoke alarms go off, it can integrate into the burglar alarm system, set off the outside siren, notify me, and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to have these three pieces of trunking, two large pieces of trunking to carry all the data and low voltage wiring, and a single piece of trunking to carry any kind of mains cables. I also might use this trunking in the future if I ever wanted to pull any additional circuits up into the attic. Potentially I'm considering, if I have a UPS in the rack, potentially running a circuit out of that UPS to feed a couple of sockets upstairs potentially that are fed by the UPS to provide battery back sockets around the house. So I might end up using the trunking for that as well. So may as well put this in now so it's there in the future. So yeah, that's my plan for the trunking. The two large pieces of maxi trunking for all the low voltage stuff, and then the small bit of trunking alongside it to carry any kind of mains cables I want to pull in the future. So my plan for this is to install the two lengths here. We'll screw them to the wall, butt them up against the floor, and cut out a hole in the floor that's just slightly smaller than the outline of the trunking, and that'll let me get all my cables through this trunking, into the underfloor area, and through the garage ceiling. Then to get it up into the attic, rather than just butting it up against the ceiling and then cutting a hole out in the ceiling, what I'm actually going to try and do is cut a hole in the ceiling and actually feed the trunking up through the ceiling into the attic. That's because, as I mentioned, I'm going to be boarding out the attic with loft boards, and because there's insulation in the attic, the loft boards are going to be installed onto loft legs. So there'll be about a sort of, I think, 20 centimetre gap between the ceiling and the top of the attic flooring once it's installed. So my plan here is to bring the trunking through the cupboard ceiling, and so it's above the finished floor level of the attic. That way when I floor the attic, I can put the boards around the trunking sticking up and then carefully cut the trunking off to be flush with the finished floor level. That way the trunking will almost act like a sort of conduit, so I can then push cables from the cupboard up into the attic, and it'll go through, get past all the insulation because it'll be inside the trunking, and then pop up above the flooring, so I can easily route it around. So that's my plan. It'll probably make more sense when it's installed, so let's get it installed, and then we'll see what I've done. Okay, so a bit of a progress update. So I've now installed all the trunking in the upstairs cupboard. So as we can see, we've got the trunking installed here. So that runs all the way up to the ceiling and actually through the ceiling up into the attic. We'll take a look at that in a minute. So we have the maxi trunking on the left here. And what I've done then to secure the cables is I've installed this all-round band. So this is a steel band, and this particular stuff I've used is plasticized. It's got like a plastic coating on the outside, so it's not sharp in any way, so there's no issues of that scoring the cables or anything. And that's then screwed back to the wall. So that means that it complies with all the UK's sort of fire safety regulations about keeping the cables contained in the event of a fire if the trunking were to melt. But it also just means that I can take the trunking lid off and not have all the cables spill out because they're secured in a bunch of points. So when I pull the cables in, all I need to do is pull them up behind these, keep them inside all the banding, and it just keeps all the cables neat inside the trunking. I mean, I can easily take the front off without any issues. Then if we look down here, we can see a big hole in the floor. So that hole in the floor down there is easily covered by the trunking, so when the trunking lid's on, you don't see that hole, but that goes right down into the underfloor void, and behind that, you probably can't make it out, but there's a big hole below that leads down into the garage ceiling. Then, as before, we have this other access hole here. This leads into all the other cable routes that go under the upstairs floor to serve all the downstairs rooms. So we've got this hole here. There's a joist off to the side here. There's a couple of holes through that joist, so I can easily get all the cables to this point from downstairs, through that joist, and then drop them straight down into the garage ceiling. Finally, I've installed that additional trunking here for the mains cables, so that's kept more than 50mm away from the data trunking to prevent any interference issues. So any mains cables such as smoke alarm feeds or other mains leads I want to put in the future can all go into this. And then for fire clipping in this, I've just used these D-line fire clips. They're a bit too small for this trunking. I really should have bigger ones for this trunking, but they'll be absolutely fine. Although I have to say though that this trunking on the right is absolutely dreadful. So they're both Dita TTE brand trunking. This is their maxi trunking, and this is just some cheap mini trunking I bought from Screwfix, but again TTE brand. It is the worst trunking I have ever used. It's so thin, it's unreal, and it's so flexible that you can barely clip the cover on. And in going down hitting the cover on just with my fist, I've managed to crack a bit of the cover. It is the flimsiest trunking I have ever worked with. So I don't know if I'll just live with this, or I might end up ripping this out. I think if I'm in a shop that has better trunking at some point before I've used this trunking, I might pick up better stuff and replace this, but we'll figure that out later. But yeah, I do not recommend the cheap Dita TTE brand mini trunking from Screwfix, because this is dreadful. I mean, it had like 2-star reviews, it was pretty badly reviewed, but I thought, people just don't know what they're doing with it. Surely it can't be that bad. It is. But anyway, so that's the trunking now installed. And as I mentioned, it goes up through the ceiling and up into the attic. So we'll jump up there and take a look at what we have. And then here we are in the attic, and here we can see the other end of that trunking. And this is what I meant by pushing them through into the attic so they protrude above the insulation level. Now, I will admit that I did actually mismeasure these slightly. I was just an idiot and got mixed up with the units. So they won't go above the finished floor level. The finished floor level will be about 10 centimetres higher than these, but they will still stick up above the finished insulation level. So when the insulation's down, these will still kind of be in line with the top of the insulation. So it means that if I put a hole in the loft boarding once the loft boarding's in place, I'll be able to easily go through reach through that hole and get into this trunking without having to fish through insulation to try and find a hole in the ceiling. So this definitely works really well. As you can see, I've left the lid on, the top piece of the trunking. This is a separate piece of lid from downstairs, so this piece of lid will stay permanently attached. And what I think I'll do, just to be extra safe, is I'll put some cable ties around these bits of trunking just to keep the lid on so the lid can never pop off under the floor once the loft's boarded. So that's kind of what I've done there. So the plan will be that all the cables for upstairs will come up from the garage, through that hole in the floor, up this trunking. It'll then come out horizontally across the loft boarding and then up into the cable basket that I'll be installing along here. And then here we are in the garage, so we've got the rack here, and as you can see behind the rack, we've got this massive big hole in the ceiling. And in fact, if you look up there, you can just about make out the slot that goes into that trunking upstairs. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, this hole will need to be fire stopped. There's very strict regulations around fire stopping of downstairs ceilings when there's a habitable room above, especially when the room's a garage. So I'll need to put some sort of fire sealant on this. What I'll do is I'm going to go with some sort of fire collar that will screw up onto the ceiling around the cables. It'll still allow me free access to get additional cables in and out, but in the event of a fire, it'll expand and block up the hole. The particular fire collar I'm going to be using can easily be retrofitted even when there's cables in place, so I'm not going to rush and try and get that installed straight away. I want to get all the cables installed first, and then afterwards I'll put the fire collar in. I'll probably do that in this video, but it just depends on the time of when it arrives, because I've not ordered it yet. So if it arrives in time for this video, I'll put it in this video. If not, I will be installing it in the next video, because you do need to fire stop these sorts of holes. So yeah, all the cables will come through from either downstairs or upstairs, drop through this hole, and then feed into the rack. I'll need to figure out some sort of plan to keep some sort of service loop, because I want to have a ton of slack in here, especially if I ever need to move the rack, because as you can see it's in front of some racking. The stuff on this racking is stuff I don't usually really need out, but I might need to get to it in the future. So I want to be able to easily slide the rack out the way. So I don't quite know how I'll do that yet. I'll possibly use some sort of all-round band screwed up to the ceiling or onto the wall at the back, just to sort of manage a big bundle of cable away from the hole, then back into the rack, so I can, even if I have to unscrew that band to then get the slack out, maybe something like that. But at any rate, what I'll do is when I pull the cables in, I'll just leave an absolute ton of slack on them for now, and I can figure out managing them once they're all in. So yeah, that's a hole that gets me under the upstairs floor and up into the attic. So now it's time to install all the cable basket in the attic. So this is the cable basket I've gone for, which from a company in the UK called Direct Channel. I've used them before for Unistrut and they're quite good. And in particular, they're good because they sell these really short lengths. So normally when you buy a cable basket, it comes in 3-metre lengths. However, getting 3-metre lengths, first of all, delivered is a pain, and then trying to get them up the stairs and then manoeuvre them up into the attic and then get them past the roof trusses to where they need to be would be a complete nightmare. So instead, I've gone for these little 1-metre lengths, and these should be absolutely brilliant for what I'm doing. So these are 200 wide by I think 50 or 60 deep, so they're quite large, and this should give you loads of space to run all the cables, keep the different bundles of different types of cables separate, tie them all to the basket, and get a really neat end result. So I've got a bunch of these 1-metre baskets, and then I've got the brackets here that they install onto. So with these brackets, all I need to do is screw these up to the roof trusses. There's then these little hooks on it. The basket slides under the hooks, and then you bend the hooks round, and that keeps the basket fixed in place. And then to fix the basket together, I've got this little bag here of joiners. Now, this is going to be a complete nightmare because there's about 4 different types of pieces in here. They're all just jumbled into one bag, so it's going to be an adventure trying to pick out the right parts. But with each piece of basket, if I use 3 of these couplers, that lets me join 2 lengths of basket together. And I've already tried previously joining 2 lengths of basket together, and when they're fixed together, they are completely solid. So when I put the brackets in, I'll probably actually only have 1 bracket per length of basket, but with the fixings with these couplers, they're so strong that I don't have any concerns about that at all. These couplers are really, really strong. So yeah, time to jump up in the basket, get the brackets all marked out, get the brackets installed, then we can install the baskets. Okay, so we're now up in the attic, and what I've now done is I've gone around and marked out the screw position for the top screw hole of each bracket for the cable tray. So you see I've got them all marked on the roof trusses here, here, and so on. Now I'm installing the basket quite high up. Now the reason I've done that is because there's this big piece of timber here, and this is nailed onto these roof trusses with massive nails coming through. So I don't want to mount the bracket here because I don't want to end up drilling or screwing a screw in and hitting a nail on the inside and that causing all sorts of issues. Because if I can't get one bracket in the right position, all the others will be out of position. So I'm going to install it up here where it's completely out of the way of any potential fixings that could potentially get in the way of it. And it also makes sense to keep it nice and high up, so if I ever need to, say, try and crawl through here or anything like that, the cables are completely out of the way. So yeah, the basket's going to be quite high up along here. So this is the top hole screw position of each bracket. And to mark these out, I've used a laser level, so if we turn that on now, like that, you can see I've used a green laser level, and as you can see, it goes right around the attic. So this is actually a really cheap Amazon special laser level, so it's from a brand called IMACC. Never heard of it, but when I was looking at buying a laser level, I wanted one that was a green laser and was 360 degree on both axes, so I could have like a vertical axis as well. I wanted one that could do full 360, green laser, vertical horizontal axis. And like looking at the better brands like Milwaukee, DeWalt, those kind of real brands, you're looking at £300, £400, £500 for a laser level. This was about 50, and it actually does basically everything. I mean, sure, it's maybe not going to be the most durable thing in the world, and it does feel a little bit cheap. But for £50 or £60, whatever I paid for this, it was not expensive. I'll put a link in the description. This is absolutely brilliant because I could set this up on a tripod here, get it to the right height, and mark out basically every single roof truss all around the attic. There was a couple it couldn't get because it would be in the shadow of one of these, but all I need to do is just move the laser a couple of times, making sure it's the same height every time, and then just mark them all out. So that was absolutely brilliant. That was super easy. So yeah, for such a cheap laser level, this thing's brilliant. And then for added fun, if you turn on all the lasers, you get this crazy looking sort of nightclub dance floor attic sort of situation, which is pretty cool. So yeah, absolutely love this laser level. It's absolutely brilliant. So now with all these brackets marked out, all I need to do is go around, offer the bracket up, mark out the bottom screw hole as well, so I can line the top hole up, mark out the bottom one, and get all these brackets fixed in place. Now, these roof trusses are at 600 centres, and the basket I bought mentioned the weight sort of rating of it was assuming fixings every 1.5 metres. So if I put these brackets every other roof truss, so put one there, skip that one, put one there, and so on, the brackets will be spaced every 1.2 metres, which should be absolutely fine. It would be completely unnecessary to put a bracket on every single roof truss, so I'll just put one every other roof truss and get the brackets in. So time to get all these brackets screwed in and get the basket installed. And there we go. So that's all the brackets now installed. So you can see we've got them installed all the way down this side of the attic and also all the way down the other side. And as I mentioned before, I've installed them every other joist bay or every other truss. So there's one there, not one there, not one there, and so on. And that should be absolutely fine in terms of strength. I mean, these are so solidly fixed, it's ridiculous. There is no chance of them moving. So yeah, this is probably way over engineered for the amount of weight this is ever going to take. But yeah, this is going to be a really solid setup, which is great. So now time to install the basket. So what I think I'll do is, because these are spaced more than one every metre, if I would try and install each basket one at a time and couple it on, that might be a bit tricky because it's only going to be on one bracket and it might bend. So what I think I'll probably end up doing is coupling the 1 metre length into 2 metre lengths, and then mount each 2 metre length onto the brackets one at a time, so I can sort of make up individual 2 metre lengths and then put them on. And that should be fairly easy to do. So I can couple them together on the ground to make 2 metre lengths, put those lengths up here, get them all installed, and then couple those together to get the full basket set up, installed all the way along. So time to do that. I'm really excited to see how this turns out and see what this looks like in the end, because this is going to end up looking really, really cool. And with that, we now have all the cable basket installed. So I've got it installed down both the left-hand side of the attic and also the right-hand side. And that was pretty easy to install, and the end result looks absolutely brilliant. I'm definitely starting to feel a bit like I maybe over-engineered this a little bit. I've probably not really got enough cables to even come anywhere close to filling this, but it's just going to be so much easier to be able to pull the cables up into this, run them along the basket with Velcro zip ties every so often to keep them in neat bundles, and then pull them down into the rooms without having to try and clip every cable all the way along here. And then if I need to add anything in the future, it's dead easy to add it in rather than needing to cut cable ties or use more cable clips. So even though it is a bit over the top, I think this is going to be extremely useful, especially when it comes to future expansion. So with the basket now installed in the attic and all the trunking installed in the cupboard, we're now ready to run some cables. So let's jump down into the garage and talk about what we'll be doing. So with that, we're now ready to start running cables. So as you can see, we've got all the cables going to run here. Now the Cat 6A is all in boxes, so the cable can just be pulled straight out of these boxes. I'll lay the boxes probably on their backs, the pull holes poking up, and pull them straight up through the hole in the ceiling. So that should be dead easy for all the box cables. Then for all the reels, I bought this cheap little cable, I think they call it a cable dispenser or something. You can put the reels on it, the bar comes out, and it'll work. It's not the best thing in the world, but I think it was like 20 quid, it was quite cheap, so it'll do the job absolutely fine. Now you'll notice with these boxes, first of all I have 4 boxes of Cat 6A, which if these were full boxes of like 300 odd metres, that would be completely excessive, that would be 1200 metres. I don't need that much cable. And you'll also notice that these boxes are all a little bit scruffy, they're not brand new. And that's because with these, rather than buying brand new boxes of cable, I bought some partially used ones from eBay. It was like a CCTV installation company that was selling these off. Now the reason I did that wasn't actually for a cost saving. Buying these 4 boxes here probably cost round about the same as the 2 original boxes I was planning on buying. Now admittedly the 2 original boxes I was planning on buying had a DCA Euroclass fire rating. This is higher end cable with a B2CA fire rating, so it is a better cable. And buying these boxes partially used was a lot cheaper than buying this particular cable new. But the reason I did this was actually so I could have 4 boxes instead of 2. For the sort of amount of cable I need here, buying 4 complete brand new boxes would have been a complete waste of money and would have cost far too much. But instead, I found the seller selling these boxes, I think just left over from a job, with about 200 metres each. So this is 213 metres, 201 metres, 209, and I think this one's 188. So there's still a decent amount of cable on these. But what this means is I can now have 4 boxes of cable, so I can pull 4 cables at the same time. So that's potentially a tip that could be potentially useful for you if you're trying to do this sort of install in your own house. a lot of the time you don't really need any more cable than one single box. But if you just buy a single box, you can only really pull one cable at the same at a time, or you're having to mess about with measuring lengths and then cutting individual lengths of cable off and then pulling them through. Whereas instead, I was able to get these 4 partially used boxes and then pull them all at the same time. Of course, you'll need to be careful if you're buying sort of second-hand cable. Make sure you're still getting decent stuff. Make sure you're not getting some sort of weird off-brand thing. But with this, it was a big company that was just selling off some excess cable. You can see they're presumably left over from a big, massive job, because you see the numbers on the boxes here. You're looking at like 19, 24, 29. So it's also been on a job where there's been, 20, 30 odd boxes of cable, and they just had these left over, so they sold them off. So yeah, definitely a tip that could potentially be useful. If you're trying to pull some cable but you don't need absolutely tons, it might be worth looking for partially used boxes on eBay, so you can buy multiple boxes and pull multiple cables at once. So, yep, that's what we've got for the cable. So now's the fun part, start pulling them all in. Now, I'm not going to immediately start filming this straight away and start filming the first runs, just because there's a lot of figuring out I need to do, the best ways to get them through, the best way to try and route it up into the cable basket in the attic, and all that sort of stuff. So I want to get all that done off camera, and I'll come back once I've got a few more of the runs pulled in, and I've got things figured out a little bit. So I'll go away, start pulling these in. I'll keep my camera in my pocket at all times, so if I find anything interesting or good to show along the way, I'll jump in and sort of show what I'm doing. So I'll go away, start running some cables, and jump in as I go. Okay, so now pulling in the first run. I know I said I wasn't going to film the first run, but it's actually going quite well, so I thought I may as well show you. So the run I'm doing is the bedroom TV in the master bedroom. So the cables are coming up the trunking there. They're coming over here. They'll be tidied up a lot neater once they're actually pulled in. And then along the cable tray, or cable basket. And then they're dropping down over here. So as you can see, I've moved some of the insulation out of the way, and I've actually located where the TV point's going to be, because that black cable going down through the ceiling, that's the TV aerial that already runs to the bedroom. So this should be a fairly easy run to do, because there's already a cable going to the exact point. So all I need to now do is get this cable pulled down, clipped along or attached somehow, and then drop it down into that hole and pop out behind the TV. Now, as you'll have seen before, the existing TV point's quite low down. It's the height of a normal socket, whereas the TV is actually going to be wall mounted. So what I'll do is I'll cut out a couple of back boxes for the double socket and the network point and aerial point behind the TV, cut those out, pull that aerial point up to that new back box, and also pull my network cables out that box as well. So that should be pretty easy to do. So yeah, time to get these all pulled in and get the bedroom run complete. The other thing I've done over here is I was trying to work out how I'm going to manage this sort of bundle of cable and get it up into the cable basket. Now, of course, there will ultimately be flooring going in here, and what I'll do is once the flooring's in, I'll put some sort of trunking or basket or cable tray or something across the flooring that's got a lid on it, so it's durable for being stood on or whatever. Something across the flooring to over here, and then the cable will run up into the basket. So for now, I'm just going to leave enough slack to allow me to get that in. But what I needed to do was some sort of way to get the cable from here, from the horizontal plane when it's across the flooring or whatever, up into the basket. So what I've done here is I've taken these Velcro cable ties and I've just screwed them onto the trusses here with just a tiny little screw and a washer. So that's pretty strong. So what that means is that once I've got the cable pulled to the appropriate length, I can just pull it back into here and then Velcro that together. Same with down there, I can attach that one. And that'll then give me a sort of bundle of cable, so all the network cables will run down here in a bundle, but it means I can very easily open that bundle up and pop new cables in and close it up again. And then in terms of the two trunkings, my plan here is the one on the left here is going to be all the network cable, and the one on the right is going to be the speaker, alarm and coax. So what I'll probably do is the network cable will come across and have a bundle on this truss here, and then for the speaker cable what I'll do is I'll have it come across here, and it'll go up this left-hand truss here, just keep the two bundles separate. So I'll just do the exact same thing as I've done here with the cable ties on this truss here as well. Speaker cable stuff will come up as well, and that'll come into the basket. And what I think I'll do is I'll try and run the network cable along the front of the basket and the speaker and everything else along towards the back of the basket. I'm not worried about any interference between like the speaker cable and the network cable. I just want to keep it separate from like a logical or organisational perspective really, so that's the plan there. So yeah, time to get those boxes cut out in the bedroom, get the cable pulled down into them, and finish off the bedroom run. Okay, so now here we are in the bedroom. So what I've done is I've cut out the 2 points where the data points and the socket are going to go for the TV. So as you can see down here, we've got the original points. We've got a double socket and an aerial point. The double socket cabling goes down to under the floor, but the aerial point comes up the wall, and I can just about feel the coax in behind this insulation. I really shouldn't be touching, I'm going to regret that later, but I can feel the coax in there. Now this wall does have a horizontal noggin, kind of round about here. So I won't be able to feed cables directly down and into the back of this socket because there's that noggin. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this aerial point and I'll use that existing coax to feed some twin and earth from this aerial point up through the noggin, because there'll be a hole in there for the coax, and up to this back box here. What I can then do is I can put a fuse connection unit on this back box instead of the aerial point, spur off the socket into the fuse connection unit, come straight up in twin and earth into the double socket here for the powering the TV. And then what I can do is I can drop all my cables, so the coax is already there, plus my network cables down here and into this back box here. And that then means I'm sort of staying within the wiring zones, because the twin and earth is going to come across into this point here for a fuse connection unit, and it'll then run straight up vertically into this double socket. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky in terms of the wiring zones for the data lines and the coax, and it's a little bit ambiguous as to whether they actually need to run in zones, but I prefer to do that. So with the coax, it kind of enters the wall vertically above this point here. So if I were to use that existing hole in the top plate of the wall to feed everything down, they're technically going to come down and cross over this area here that would technically be out of zone. It's probably not the biggest deal in the world, but because I've got such easy access upstairs, what I think I'll do is I'll drill a new hole in the top plate of the wall directly above this cutout here. I'll use that to feed the coax and all my data points directly vertically down into here, and then this can have the double socket on it. So yeah, that should work. So time to go and drill that hole up there, get that data point, that aerial point taken out, and get the coax pulling a twin and earth up, and it should be good to go. So time to try that. Okay, so I've now pulled some twin and earth from that back box down there, all the way up to this new socket position here, and I've pulled the coax out the wall. And also, after all that sort of rambling about wiring zones, actually it turns out that, to be honest, that coax is actually closer, coming through the top of the wall, closer to this side of the box here anyway, so I can actually use that hole in the top plate of the wall for that and still be perfectly fine, so that saves a bit of effort as well. So yeah, all I now need to do is get my 3 data points fed down the same hole as this coax, and out of this hole, get a back box put in there, and we're good to go. So there we go, we can now see we have the 3 Cat6As going down into the wall alongside that coax. And then what I've tried to do is I've tried to keep my Cat6A and all my new cables I'll be installing quite high up above the installation. It just means it's visible for me to ever work on it, and it means it's kept away from anything down here where there's mains cables, cable clips, random nails sticking out that have kind of been shot into the wood and then missed, stuff like that. So I want to keep my cables quite high up and out the way. So as you can see, I've secured it to there, comes across here, it's secured there, and then comes up into the cable basket. And I've kind of kept nice big sort of wide swoops to not have any issues with the bend radius on this cable. In order to fix these, what I've actually used is, rather than cable clips, what I've done is I've used these, which are cable tie bases. So they're kind of metal, bent bits of metal basically, that you can screw to a surface and then feed a cable tie through it. So I've mounted those at various points and then just fed cable ties through to secure the cables. Now, I know a lot of networking people absolutely hate cable ties, and yes, they're not great for future maintenance, but for things like this, where it's like a run that I'm not going to really change, it's kind of fairly permanent, I'm happy to use cable ties. And then for areas where I'm going to be potentially changing the cables, such as on the basket or down there where the cables come up from the garage, that's where I'm using the Velcro cable ties. The only important thing to bear in mind if you're using cable ties with any kind of data cable is don't crush it. So yes, there's cable ties here, but they're quite loose. I can actually almost pull the cables through them if I really wanted to. You don't want to crush the cable, because if you do that, you can start causing crosstalk issues if you kind of crush the twisted pairs. But these are nice and loose, just holding the cable nice and securely. So yeah, once the installation's down, that should look pretty neat. Then as before, the cable runs along the basket. Once I've got more cables in, I'll put some Velcro cable ties just to kind of secure them in place, and I'll try and keep separate bundles for different types of cable. And then just roughly to show what I was talking about doing here, the cable now comes down, through one of these screwed on Velcro zip ties, through the other one down here, and then runs across, and then down the trunking. And then there's plenty of slack on this, so what will happen is I'll leave enough slack so when I board the attic, I can board under all the cables. The cables will sit on top of the flooring and I can then put some sort of containment around it. But yeah, that's the first 3 runs to the bedroom. To come up the trunking, up into the cable basket, run all the way along there, and then down into the bedroom wall. And there we go, that's what it looks like with the insulation back down. Cable pops out through the insulation and up into the basket. I really like how that looks really neat. And then here we are back there in the bedroom, we've got the cables pulled through. So that's my 3 cables there, plenty of slack on them, and then the coax is even longer, I'll need to cut that shorter. And then what I've done to label these cables so I can identify which cable here relates to which cable in the garage is, as you saw, I pulled these 3 cables from 3 boxes at the same time. So what I've done is I've numbered each of those boxes, 1 to 4, and then on each cable, I've basically put a number of dashes to represent which box that cable's come from. So this cable came from box 2, this came from box 1, and this came from box 3, and so on. So what I can then do is right now these cables are still connected to the boxes at the garage. So what I can do is I can number these cables here, remember which number I've added to the cable corresponds to which box, go around to the garage, label all the cables with numbers to match here based on what box they've come from, then cut them off from the boxes and start pulling more runs. So there we go, I've flagged up each cable with some numbers. So let's go to the garage, number them the same, and then cut them off from the boxes. Okay, so now back down in the garage, you can see up there, that's our cables coming down through the ceiling, and then they're coming down into these numbered boxes. That's what I was talking about before. Each box is now numbered, so those numbers correspond to the numbers in the bedroom. So all I need to do is I've pulled out a bunch of extra slack. I won't need all this, but I'm going to leave a good amount of slack on this cable just so I can actually have a decent loop here for any extra cable, and also to allow me to move the rack around if I have to. So I want to have a decent amount of slack. So I'm going to get a decent amount of slack pulled out of these, label them, cut them off, and then we can pull more runs. So there you go, that was the complete installation of one of the cable runs. So that's now coming out the ceiling there. Big, massive excess loop for slack, and it's always hanging off the back of the rack here, all labelled. So then we've got the rest of the cables all down here and ready to install more of them. So I'm not going to film any more right now just because I just need to get some of these in. So what I'll do is I'll go away off camera, start installing some of these, and I'll jump in here and there if I find anything interesting. So yeah, time to go and get a lot more runs installed. Okay, so now the next network point I'm installing is my office and my studio. So thankfully the 2 rooms share a wall, so I'm going to install the 2 points on the same wall here, so they're kind of sitting side by side, back to back. They can't sit completely back to back because the back box would be too deep, so they'll sit sort of offset one to the side of the other through the wall from each other. And that means I only need to bring the cables through one hole in the attic and through the wall, and then they can pop out both sides of the wall. Now because this is an internal wall, it has a noggin across the middle, somewhere here, so I will need to cut into the wall to drill through that. The alternative would have been to put it on an external wall like this one here, which doesn't then have a noggin in it, so I wouldn't need to drill through that. However, I've already tried going up into the attic to get into this area here, and I simply can't get in far enough to drill down through the top plate of this wall. The roof is just too low, so I won't be able to do that, so I'll have to do it over here. And I'll just need to accept there'll be a bit of damage in this wall that will need filled, which is fine. So what I also need to do is drill down through the top plate of the wall, come down inside the wall, drill through the noggin by cutting a bit of the plasterboard out, and then I can drop down into my 2 network points down here. So the first thing I need to do is drill into the top plate of the wall, and to do that you'll see up here there's a very small little hole in the ceiling. And this is something I like to do to help me identify where I need to drill down into the top plate of a wall from the attic. Because what I've done here is I've measured out exactly where I want the cables to drop down inside the wall, and on both sides of this wall I've drilled a small, I think it's a 4mm, 3mm hole up into the attic through the ceiling. And what this means is I can go up into the attic, I can see those 2 holes, and it shows exactly where I need to drill down and exactly where the top of the wall is from both sides. And while yes, there is a small little hole I now need to fill, I'd much rather have this and have to fill a tiny little hole there than try and either guess or measure off where I'm trying to drill down, get it wrong, and then burst out with a big hole through the ceiling or potentially come out at an angle through the wall and the ceiling. That's going to be much harder to fill than filling this tiny little hole there that's really not going to be a problem. So we can now jump up into the attic, find these 2 holes, drill down between them, get into the wall, cut the plasterboard out, drill through the noggin, and then pop out to my 2 network points. Okay, so now here we are up in the attic, and as you can see, just over here, we can see my 2 holes that I've drilled up from downstairs. So that indicates that the wall on my studio side ends here, and the wall on my office side ends here. So if I drill through the top plate of the wall directly between these 2 holes here, straight down, that'll get me into the wall in the exact position that I need to drill down into. So, yep, time to drill that and get the cable in fished into the wall. And there we go. So I've now got a couple of network points on this side of the wall in my studio, as well as a couple of others on the other side of my office. As you can see, as I mentioned, I've made a hole in the wall there, and you can see the cables are going through that, through a hole I had to drill through a noggin. And while yes, that's a big hole in the wall, that should be very easy to patch, and you'll barely even see it's there when it's done. Done this loads of times before, it's dead easy to patch these holes. With this, the one bit of advice I would give is it doesn't really take any more effort to patch a larger hole than it does a smaller hole. What does take more effort is if you cut out a smaller hole, then realise it's not quite big enough to drill through whatever you're trying to drill through, and then you have to enlarge the hole, because then you have 2 or more bits of plasterboard to patch back in. So you may as well cut a hole really as big as you could possibly need to drill through it, and then that piece will easily patch back in there if I get it the right way up. Like that piece will fit back in there and be dead easy to fill. Of course I need to tidy up the edges and all that kind of stuff, get it all fitted in properly, but that should be pretty easy to patch. The other bit of advice I'd give is to look into these drill bit extensions, because if you're needing to drill, say, through a hole in the wall, through a noggin, these can be really useful to make your drill bit a lot longer, so you can kind of get a better angle to drill more directly straight down through the timber. If all you had was the drill bit in the drill and nothing else, you end up with the drill starting to hit the wall, so you have to drill at even more of an angle, and then that's not great. So these extensions can be absolutely brilliant just to help you get a bit of a steeper angle to drill more sort of vertically straight down. So they're definitely worth looking into. And then on the other side of the wall of my office, we can see we have another couple of cables coming out there. So that'll be the network point in my office. And then finally up above there in the attic, we can now see we have the 4 cables coming out the hole in the ceiling there, up onto the timbers there, brought across on the timbers, up here, into the cable basket where it runs along, back through that bundle, and back down through the trunk into the garage. Now you'll notice I've not secured the cable here yet. That's just because there's going to be additional runs pulled sort of to this same area on this wall, so I kind of want them to also meet the same bundle, so I'll leave this loose just now, and once I've got those other cables in, I'll tie these all back to that timber there. So, yep, that's that run installed. So what I'll do now is I'll actually go away this time and just start running more cables rather than filming them all, because it takes ages when I film them. So I'll go and get a lot more cables installed, and then we'll come back, and hopefully by the time we come back, there should be a lot more stuff installed so that we can take a look at. Okay, so I'm now making a bit of progress pulling in more runs, so as you can see we've got a lot more cables going up the attic now. And now what I'm trying to do is run some cables to the living room, because I found myself running all the attic cables because that's really easy to do, and putting off doing all the downstairs ones because they're a lot harder, so I wanted to take a break from the attic and get some of those harder runs in. So I've already started running the cables to the living room, so they run up through the hole, along here, past that hole there, along here you can see I've got 4 Cat 6As in that hole there. This crowbar is just keeping them in place just so they have a nice curve here. They then run up here, round past this hole here, and then they run inside this cupboard. You can see the cable running there, and it's now coming up this hole here. So I wasn't going to be able to really pull it completely end to end. It's just far too tight. It would not do that. So what I've kind of done is I've pulled off the sort of roughly the right length I'll need. I'll pull it through all the way, and if I need to pull any more slack, I can kind of pull it in stages. So yeah, I've got the cable coming out to here. And what I now need to do is feed it all the way down the hallway. You see there's a cable rod there sticking out, and they get it into the living room. And then through here in the bedroom, above the media panel, what I've already done is I've taken the media panel off, and I've pulled the existing data and coax out the media panel up into the bedroom, just to free up space in the hole in the top plate of the wall. And interestingly, it turned out there was actually 2 Cat 6 cables to that media panel, so there was one Cat 6 being used for the phone line, and the other one was just coiled up inside it, and I suspect both of these will run to the understairs cupboard, so don't know why the other one never was terminated. I don't know if plans changed, or because the plans for the house only show a phone point in there, so no idea. Or maybe they meant to put a data point in and then didn't have enough data points and didn't terminate it. But yeah, there was actually 2 cables, but I've pulled these all out. Obviously the coax is going to go back in. These Cat 6s aren't going to go back in just because there's not going to be enough space when I've got my Cat 6As in, and these don't really run to where I want them because these run to the hall cupboard, not the garage. So these Cat 6s I'll take out. But what that's done is it's let me free up space in the hole in the top plate of the wall. And it is very tight, but I think I will be able to at least get 4 Cat 6As, the coax for the aerial, a coax for the sub, and the 3 speaker cables I need. So I will need to forgo maybe a couple of the Cat 6As I was going to run. I was originally going to run 6, but equally looking inside that media panel back box, it's going to be really tight to even terminate those Cat 6As. So I think 4 is going to be absolutely fine. And to test that, all I've done is I basically took this took some cable and just cut little bits, so cut off little bits of Cat6a and cut off little bits of speaker cable, and I've just basically bundled these up and tried to feed them through the top plate of the wall, and it is tight, but they should fit. So if I can do that and I can avoid having to cut any holes in the top plate of the wall, that would be ideal, because realistically I've got big flexible drill bits, but they're not flexible enough to really get in there and drill down. So I'd either have to cut out the top of the living room wall and drill up, or cut out the bedroom wall here and drill down. The latter would have been my preferred option, just because it would be much nicer to patch this wall than something right above the TV, which is very much in sort of eye level. But if I can avoid drilling any holes, that would be preferable. So yeah, that's what we have above the media panel. So what I need to do is get my cables pulled all the way through to here, and then see if we can fit them all down into that wall. So since that last clip you saw, I've done an absolute ton more work. I've pulled loads more runs, and I finally pulled all the cables that are going to need to go into the living room media panel. So this is all in the upstairs bedroom. There's an absolute ton of cables sitting in the corner here, and I really want to get them out of the way. So what we've got is we've got 4 Cat6As, which will be all the data, HD base T, and all that sort of stuff. We've got 3 4-core speaker cables. One of those goes back to the rack, one of those will do the rear speakers, and one of those will do the ceiling speakers. And we've got 2 coaxes. One of these is the original TV aerial that goes up to the attic, and the other one is going to be used for the sub, so that's going to go from the media panel across the living room and down to behind the couch, and I'll be able to connect a sub to that. So time to get all these pulled down into the wall. Now, as I mentioned, I'm really hoping that all these cables will fit through the existing holes in the top plate of the wall. That's one of the reasons I went for 4 Cat6As rather than the original plan to have 6, just because 6 would just not quite fit, and if I have to make new holes in the top plate of the wall, I'd have to cut out either the wall in the bedroom here and try and drill down from here, or more likely cut a hole in the living room wall, which I'd really rather not do. So if I can fit all these cables to the original holes in the top plate of the wall, that would be amazing. So I suppose what I now need to do is try and feed some rods down in the living room and see if I can get these cables pulled down. I'm not going to film that just because it's just going to be a really stressful, messy situation to try and get it in, but it should be absolutely fine. Essentially what I'm going to do is feed some cable rods down the holes in the top plate of the wall that are probably a bit hard to see, but they're kind of at the back there. Grab them at the living room media panel end, try and pull them down, and if I can get those rods down, I should be able to then pull these cables with them. What I think I'll also do is, rather than using the rods themselves to pull the cables, I'll use the rods to pull some of this washing line, which essentially is a drawstring. I'll then tie the cables to the drawstring and then pull the cables down with that. It just means that if the cables snap off, the drawstring stays in place, so I don't have to try and feed the rods again. And it also means that because the holes are really, really tight, if I use the drawstring, it means I don't need to worry about the thickness of the rod. This is a much thinner thing to pull alongside the cable than trying to pull a rod, which also has the big sort of screw connection thing on the end. So yeah, time to see if I can get all these cables down into that wall. And there we go, that's all the cables now pulled back down into the living room. Now that was an absolute nightmare to do. The holes at the top of the wall are extremely tight, but I was able to get everything in but there's definitely no space for any more cables here, so I was very, very lucky. What I would definitely say is, if you're trying to do something like this, sometimes it really helps to pull a single cable, the cables one at a time. So I initially tried to pull all 4 data cables through the same hole at once, and that just wasn't going at all. But I was able to pull the exact same 4 cables through the same hole, but by pulling one at a time, and that just meant there was a bit less friction, it just worked a lot easier, so that's a bit of a tip if you're trying to do this yourself. But yeah, behind the living room here we now have 4 Cat6As, 3 speaker cables, each of these is 4-core, so one of these goes back to the rack, one of these goes to the height channels, and one of these goes to the rear channels. We have a coax here for the sub, which goes to behind the couch, and then the original coax that goes to the TV aerial. Then there's obviously some twin and earth sticking out the wall for power, and then the media panel will go back over this. Now, I could put the media panel back box back in, but I think I might actually change the media panel. I was always somewhat tempted because I'm replacing all the electrical accessories in the house with nicer ones, but I was tempted to leave the media panel and change it at a later date. However, the media panel has a special back box and they're kind of proprietary to whatever media panel you go for. So if I were to change the media panel, I would also need to change the back box. And changing the back box would mean I would need to re-terminate all the keystone modules on the network cables so I can fit the cables back out the back box again. So because of that, I think I might just get a new media panel now, fit that straight away so I don't need to worry about changing it and re-terminating the Cat6A in the future. So yeah, currently they're all just hanging out the wall in a big mess and the TV is plugged into an extension reel, but it'll do the job for now. So yeah, that's all the cables pulled into the living room. So now time to run all around, get a bunch more cables pulled in, and then wrap this all up. Okay, so I thought I'd jump in with a bit of a progress update. I've been running an absolute ton of cables downstairs, I've got loads of them in now, and I've now finally got all the cables for the kitchen TV pulled to this point. So what I can now do is get these all pulled down into the wall, ready for the TV. So to sort of show what I've got here, I've got this big bundle of cables here. There's 4 Cat6As. 3 of these are going to go to behind the TV, and then one of these is going to drop down to below the TV to make a network point on the kitchen wall below the TV. There's then a coax, that's going to go to behind the TV, and then a 2-core speaker cable that will also drop down to below the TV, probably use the same Euro module faceplate as the Cat6A to give me a speaker connection for a subwoofer. Just in case I want to add one in the future, I've got a connection there. So below the TV, I'll have a Cat6A point and a sub connection. Now, generally, I always pull 2 cables to every network point. However, with this route here in particular, I've had to drill all the joists, and there's one joist bay where each bay on either side is full of pipes, so I can't really get a drill down to drill through that joist. But thankfully, there was already a pre-drilled 25mm hole in that joist, so I'm able to get all my cables through that hole without having to drill really close to pipes. But I'm having to be a little bit conservative as to how many cables I bring into this area because I want to fit them all through that 25mm hole. These all fit absolutely fine, but there's a couple more I want to run as well, so I don't want to really unnecessarily pull extra network cables to the TV point just because I can, because that hole's going to get filled up and might impact me for future things. So yeah, that's what we have here for the TV. We've got 4 Cat6As, a 2-core speaker cable, and a coax. Then to power the TV, I've got a piece of 2.5mm twin and earth that runs under the floor here, and then under that hole there is a socket in the kitchen, so it drops down into the wall next to that socket using all the existing holes in the wall, thankfully. And then it pops out the wall next to that socket where I'll put a fuse connection unit. So that'll power the TV as a spur off that socket to this twin earth here, so that will also go down to the TV. So now we need to drill down into the top plate of the downstairs wall to make the TV point. So I've already done the trick I talked about previously. I don't know if you can really see it on camera, but what I've done is exactly the same thing I did before, where I've drilled a small hole through the ceiling on either side of the wall that I'm trying to drop the cables down into. So I've drilled one small hole on the kitchen side and one small hole on the bathroom side. Can't really see them, I think the lights are off downstairs, but there's 2 holes down here, so all I need to do is drill down, straight down through the top plate of the wall, and that'll let me drop all my cables down into that wall. So I'll drill 2 holes spaced apart from each other, one to carry all the data and AV stuff, and then one to carry the twin and earth to keep that separate. So yeah, time to drill down into the top plate of that wall, get all these cables pulled down, and with that, we'll have finished our first complete runs downstairs. Okay, so I've been pulling more cables into downstairs, getting there with it. The holes in the joists are definitely getting quite tight, but I am able to do it all, so that's really good. But I've also just been able to do something that I wasn't expecting to be able to do. So we had those 2 Cat6As that ran from the understairs cupboard to the media panel. And as you saw before, I pulled them up into the bedroom. Well, what I've been able to do is pull these across the bedroom to this hole here. So this is the hole by the bedroom door. So you'll pull these Cat6As all the way back to here. And then what I really wasn't expecting to be able to do is we come all the way around here to the top of the stairs. I've actually been able to pull the cables back to here. So I'd already seen these cables in here, but I thought they're going to be secured to stuff en route. There's going to be cable clips and tape and all that kind of stuff, because these cables don't run near any of my access holes. They kind of run along here, and then I think they disappear kind of in behind this wall here, low down under the fitted wardrobe and stuff. And I didn't want to open up access really to get to that. But it turns out they're actually not stuck to anything. So actually, I can take these cables here, so it's that one there and that one there, and I can actually pull these through from the bedroom. So if I pull these cables here, I can actually pull them directly through from the bedroom. You're probably able to make out in the bedroom, see the cables moving, but if I keep pulling these cables, the ends should come out this hole at the top of the stairs. It's definitely quite tight because I'm pulling these basically at a right angle. At some point these are going to be turning quite a tight corner, but they are actually pulling through. I think because they're running through the same holes in the joist as a bit of PVC conduit, so it's quite a smooth thing to pull against. If I pull these pull these cables through, there we go. And there we go. So I've now pulled that Cat6 that originally fed the media panel all the way out to the top of the stairs. And this is absolutely brilliant because, as I mentioned before, I need some way to have a cable going from under the stairs where the ONT is into the rack. My original plan was to drill out sideways through the wall of the cupboard into the garage and run up in conduit. But because I've actually got this cable to here that now goes to the understairs cupboard, all I now need to do is pull this round into my main cable bundle, which really just is a case of pulling it sort of from here up to here, joining the bundle of cables there and carrying it round. I can pull this Cat6 down into the garage, and then from there I can feed it straight into the rack. And then all I need to do is replace that phone point in the understairs cupboard with a RJ45 faceplate, and away we go. I'll have 2 Cat6 runs from the understairs cupboard into the rack. That has worked absolutely brilliantly. And I'm so glad I've been able to do this because it felt like a complete waste kind of cutting this cable off and leaving it in the ceiling doing nothing. I am now actually able to use this. So yeah, that was very, very lucky. And there we go. That's all the cables now pulled back into the rack. This has been an absolutely epic project. This has taken me a good few weeks of doing this because obviously I'm working full time around this. This has been like a good few weeks, basically full time doing this in evenings. It's been an absolute ton of work. But as you can see now, we have this absolutely ridiculous amount of cables. They're all going to go back into the rack. I've got about 42 network runs to here, and then a bunch more speaker cables to basically all the rooms. Then all the alarm cables pulled in as well. There is a ridiculous amount of cable here. And I'm actually dreading terminating this because it is going to take so long. I'm probably going to split it up over the course of a couple of weeks and maybe terminate a few runs every evening because I'm going to go mad if I try and do this all at once with that many cables. But yep, that's them all pulled in. Then around the back of the rack, we see they all come through that hole. In fact, I've just spotted there's another cable here that I forgot to count, so that's probably about 43 cables actually pulled in. So even more. So there's all the cables coming through that hole in the ceiling. We've then got these white cables here that are all alarm cables. Now these are currently coming through the hole in the ceiling along with all the network cables, but I think I'm going to end up moving those. I'm going to install the alarm panel on this side wall here. I'll put the alarm panel on there and possibly do some sort of steel trunking up into the ceiling and then pull the alarm cables down through that. That's absolutely fine though, because the route these take, it'll be perfectly easy to pull these across the ceiling and then drop them down. So that'll be the plan for all the alarm cables. So now the final thing I need to do before I can start terminating all these cables is just to fire seal this hole. Because as I mentioned earlier, there's a massive hole in the ceiling. This isn't really compliant with building regulations because there's a habitable room above. In fact, there's a bedroom above here. You can't have a hole through a sort of fire barrier ceiling like this straight up with a bedroom above. So that'll need to be fire sealed. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at what we're doing to solve that. So to fire seal the hole, we're going to be using this, which is from a company called Envirograph. And they call this a multi-purpose box. So you see that there, that's the instructions for it. And essentially what this is a steel box, and inside it's got intumescent material. So you can see these foam pads around here, or these sort of foil pads. These have material in them that would, in the event of a fire, would expand to fill this box. So the idea is that the cables can run through the centre of this box, and in the event of a fire, these pads will expand up and fill the hole. It also has this sort of foam piece on the front, that's a smoke shield. This isn't completely necessary, but the idea is that you can cut this around your cable, so cut a gap out of this, feed the cables through the middle of this, and that would also stop smoke as sort of air passage up into the ceiling as well, but that's also removable. And what's really good with this one in particular is what you can also do is you can remove one of the side panels. So this side panel here is detachable compared to all the others. So you can easily retrofit it. You could kind of slot this over existing cables and then pull them all through. Or in the case of my situation here, I can relatively easily take one of these sides off, open the box up, and then use that if I ever need to pull cables in, and I can't quite get the cables in with this in place. So it should be quite a good option. So yeah, all I need to do is get this screwed up to the ceiling around that hole, get the foam pad put in, and then the hole should be fire sealed. And there we go, that's it installed up there. That was all pretty easy to install, fitted the firebox, cut the smoke screen to fit the cables, put it all in, and that worked. And I can relatively easily take one of the sides off that just to get full access back up into the hole in the ceiling if I ever need to in the future to pull more cables in. So yeah, that's the hole now completely fire sealed. That's all the cables coming down into the garage. And then, while we're still in the garage, there's a couple of other cables I'll need to pull in. So I need to pull in some sort of power connection to the rack. Now there is already a double socket in the garage over here, but that's just on the downstairs socket circuit, and I want to ideally pull in a dedicated circuit just to feed the rack and any kind of other infrastructure, so the alarm system, some of the home automation stuff. I want that all on a dedicated circuit. Currently it's a split load consumer unit, so it's not ideal really having an extra circuit because if the RCD trips, it'll still trip it off. But it's a modern Hager board that can easily be converted to RCBOs. So if in the future I convert that to RCBOs, which I kind of want to do, it means the circuit here would be on a dedicated RCBO, so nothing else is going to trip it, which is kind of good. So through this wall is the understairs cupboard, so I can very easily go through that wall into the consumer unit. So around about here, I'm going to install a double socket to feed the rack. And I'm also going to install the alarm panel somewhere higher up here and bring all the cables down through the ceiling for the alarm in steel conduit. So the alarm panel will be up there, double socket there, and I'll be able to probably spur off that socket to put a spur in for the alarm, which will be installed here. The other thing electrically I'll need to bring in is some sort of bonding connection for the rack. Now, the rack itself doesn't necessarily need bonded, but all of this Cat6A is shielded cable. So it means that the shield and all the patch panels will need bonded to earth. So I'll need to bring in some sort of bonding conductor from the consumer unit and the main earth terminal in the understairs cupboard into the rack. I found some guidance on really what that should probably be, so it should probably be a sort of 16mm, 10mm kind of bonding conductor. So I'll need to bring that out the understairs cupboard, up into the ceiling, and I'm going to bring it somewhere through it, and then just through this here in the main bundle. So there'll be an earth bonding conductor in this bundle of cables here that'll run into the rack, and then we'll be bonding the patch panels in the next video. So yeah, that's the only other things I need to bring into the garage. I need some sort of power supply for the rack, so some sort of circuit to power the rack with the alarm connections and stuff installed up here. I also need to bring in a bonding conductor from the consumer unit and main earth terminal down through this bundle of cables here and then into the rack. So yeah, that's the only other thing I need to really bring into the garage. So what we'll now do is I'll quickly run around the house, take a look at all the cables we've installed, all the cable runs I've done, and then we'll wrap this up. So here we have the media panel, which we just looked at earlier. So we will have 4 Cat6As coming into here, bunch of speaker connections, subwoofer connection, and a TV aerial. So that'll all be on the media panel here. I think I'll need to install an extra faceplate just to get all these connections in, so I'll install something below the media panel. But yep, that's the main connections in the living room. Behind the couch in the living room, we have a couple of connections. So we have a 4-core speaker cable, which will be for the surround speakers, and then the coax for the sub. Now, this is actually a slight change of plan. If I mentioned earlier, my original plan was to put speakers on the wall, so use my Monitor Audio Bronze FX speakers, put them on the wall here and at the other end, and use them as surround speakers. However, I don't think it's really going to work with this setup, because in my flat, the walls the surround speakers on are quite far away from the couch, whereas these walls are right behind the couch. And for Atmos setups, they generally recommend having the surround channels at about ear level, which just won't work here because there's a light switch here and a radiator at the other end. So I just won't be able to put them at remotely anywhere near ear level. Additionally, I potentially want to install some sort of touchscreen in the wall above this light switch. So the surround speakers would have to be so high up that you probably wouldn't really hear them properly. So instead what I've done is I've decided I'm just going to get rid of those. I'll probably just sell them or something. And I'll get a couple of nice stand mount surround speakers, like maybe the Monitor Audio Radius series, something like that. Something quite small that can stand behind the couch and they'll plug into a faceplate behind here. So that was a slight change of plan, but I think that'll work a lot better. Speaking of the light switch, I have also run a piece of Cat6 down to behind here. Not Cat6A, it just was getting a bit tight to fit them all through the holes, and it's a light switch, it doesn't need Cat6A. So I've got a bit of Cat6 that I've pulled down to behind this light switch. It's not in the back box, it's kind of sitting in the wall to the side here. So that means in the future, if I want to install any kind of touchscreen here that's connected to the network, I can pull that cable back up into the wall, wherever it needs to go, and connect it to that touchscreen. So it's a bit of Cat6 just kind of sitting loose in the wall here. I've also pulled an additional bit of 1mm twin and earth into here that kind of sits in the back light switch coiled up here inside the wall and runs to above the living room ceiling. That's because potentially I'll be installing a motorised projector screen that can drop down in front of the TV. And that would need some sort of power supply, and this was the easiest place to get some sort of power supply from. So if I need to, I can run that off the back of the light switch and run a feed up to that projector screen. Then for ceiling speakers in the living room, what I've done is I've just left the cables kind of coiled up inside the ceiling. So they obviously come from the front behind the TV, up through the ceiling in a straight line through the joist bay, and I've just run them basically in the correct joist bay that I know the speaker will need to go into, but all the way to the back of the living room. So realistically, wherever I decide to put the speaker, I can just cut the hole out for the speaker, reach up, find the cable, and then pull it back. I've also run an additional cable that runs from the right speaker here across the room to where the left speaker is going to go, somewhere over there. So that can also be pulled down for a left ceiling speaker. And then the final network run I've done to the living room is for an access point. So I'm going to probably put a future access point up in this corner here somewhere. So as before, the cable's coiled up in the ceiling, ready for me to pull down. And above here is a fitted wardrobe with a hole in the floor, so I can very easily get access to that cable and drop it down. So there's a bit of Cat6A sitting above the ceiling somewhere here that I can pull through for an access point. And then finally in the living room, we've got an alarm cable in the corner here for a PIR. Next up, we have the downstairs hallway. So as you can see over here, I've pulled in a couple of alarm cables. So we have one labelled net, that's the Texcom network, so that'll go back to the panel. We'll be installing a keypad in here. And I've got another one here labelled door contact, and that'll be for a door contact on the front door. With the Texcom keypads, each keypad provides an additional 2 zones, so I don't need to wire the door contact all the way back to the panel. I can just wire it directly into the back of the keypad, which saves a bit of cabling. The risk with this is obviously if I was ever to fit another system that wasn't Texacom and didn't have that feature, I wouldn't have those zone inputs, but my door contact would be wired back to here. However, this is all 8-core alarm cable, so even if I didn't want to use the keypad zone, there'd be enough cores in this net cable to carry both a network connection to keypad and to carry the door contact zone all the way back if I kind of join these cables together. But yep, so I've been installing a Texcom flush mount keypad in this wall, and then we'll have the network connection back to the panel and a door contact for the front door. Right now the cable for the door contact is just hanging down inside a cupboard. This cupboard is next to the front door, so I don't quite know how I'm quite going to run it. I think I'll just run it in some sort of trunking through the inside of the cupboard, pop it out the wall somewhere here, and neatly run it along the top of the door and into a door contact. It was just the only way I could really get a cable to this door, because it's just, there's a big massive joist right above here, so there'll be no way I'll be able to get through and drop down in. So yeah, that cable will come out here somewhere, run across the top of the door to door contact. The final thing in the downstairs hallway is one you can't see, and that's because I want to install a ceiling speaker somewhere in here, don't quite know where. So what I've done is I've basically run that cable down the hallway. I need to actually put these downlights back in, I was using them to access it for cables, but the speaker cable runs all the way down the hallway, all the way down, I think all the way down to around about here, and then it goes left. So realistically, no matter where I put a ceiling speaker in here, I can just cut a big hole in the ceiling, reach up, find the cable and pull it down. So yeah, I can easily enough pull that cable back to wherever I want to put a ceiling speaker in here when the time comes. Next up we have the kitchen. So as you can see up here, I've got a alarm cable for an alarm PIR. And then as before in the living room, I've installed a piece of Cat6 to behind the light switch. Again, because I might want to install a touchscreen above here. Now I likely will do this upstairs as well, but I haven't run any cables into the upstairs light switches yet. And that's because with the attic access, it's really easy for me to run cables into the upstairs light switches in the future. But because all the downstairs stuff is much harder to do because it needs to run under the upstairs floor, I ran everything I could possibly ever need in for downstairs, so that once the flooring is fitted upstairs, I won't need to lift it up, try and run in future cables. So as I mentioned, with this light switch, there's a piece of Cat6 kind of coiled up in the wall beside here that could easily be pulled out and put somewhere else for a touchscreen. So the other thing in the kitchen is to get cables to this TV, which as I mentioned is a Samsung frame, so I would need to hide the one connect box somewhere. So my original plan was to pull those through into the downstairs bathroom and then install a sort of recessed one connect enclosure in the wall, put the one connect box in that and feed the cable through into the TV and mount the TV on the wall. I'm still going to do something like that, but it hasn't gone quite to plan, so let's see what's happened. So now here I am in the downstairs bathroom, and I've cut out this hole in the wall, and my original plan was to mount a sort of recessed back box for the Samsung One Connect box. So it would be a sort of recessed box in the wall, the One Connect would sit in that, and there'd be a little door on the front. I think it's called a Legrand on-cue, I think? Something like that. But annoyingly, it won't fit in this wall. We're literally, you're talking about 5mm too shallow, maybe 10mm too shallow, just the depth of this wall. That won't recess properly into this wall, so that's just not going to work, unfortunately. So I think the next best thing is, realistically, it wouldn't work from the other side either, so I still need to hide the one connect box somewhere. So I've got all these cables kind of hanging out the wall, sort of halfway up through this big hole. I think what I'm going to just do is I'm going to take a trip to IKEA and look at sort of cheap bathroom wall cabinets, because realistically this bathroom has no cabinets at all and it really needs some sort of cabinets. So I might just get a set of cheap IKEA bathroom cabinets, put them along this wall here, or maybe a sort of tall unit in the middle here. I'll recess the sockets for the TV into the wall, mount the cabinets over it. I can hide the One Connect box and all the TV stuff in one of those cupboards, and then use the other cupboards for bathroom stuff. And that will look fine. It's not the ideal option, but it's the best thing I could really come up with. So in terms of the cables we've got for the TV, we've got 4 Cat6As, 3 of those will do the TV, and then the 4th is going to drop down this hole in the noggin, run all the way down the wall, and drop and come out to a point in the kitchen, so there'll be a network point on the wall in the kitchen, just in case I ever wanted it, and that'll be roughly below the TV. We've then got a coax for the TV aerial, that'll go to the TV, piece of twin and earth, that'll go to a socket for the TV, that's going to be spurred off a socket in the kitchen, so we'll be installing a socket on this wall somewhere for the One Connect box, and that'll be hidden inside the cupboard. And then the final cable we have is a 2-core speaker cable that, like the network cable, will drop down the wall, drop nice and low down, and that network point will be a sort of 2-gang faceplate with 1 network point and 1 speaker connection. And this is going to be for a subwoofer, just because the kitchen is one of the few rooms that I might actually be using the ceiling speakers quite heavily for music. And I think I want some additional bass in here, so I'm going to install it's just a piece of speaker cable that will go back to the rack, and I can install a passive subwoofer in the kitchen. Just sort of try it out, and I may as well, again, run everything in I could possibly ever need, because it's not easy to run cables to the downstairs rooms in the future. Especially here, because the room above here is going to be hard floors, so that's a lot harder to lift than carpet, so I thought I'd run a speaker connection in just in case I ever do need a sub. So yeah, that's what we have for the kitchen TV that is also in the bathroom, but it works. And then finally, in this bathroom, I'm going to put a ceiling speaker. So as before, there's a cable, it comes into the bathroom here and it runs straight across the ceiling all the way to the far wall. That way, I can, wherever I want to put the ceiling speaker in here, I can cut a hole in the ceiling and pull that cable back down. Next to the bathroom, we then have the utility room. And to here, I've just run a single Cat6A. Normally, I do run 2 Cat6As to every point, or 2 network runs to every point. But with this, there was a single hole in the joist that I had to get through that would be really hard to drill another one in, and it was just going to be too tight. So I thought I'll just feed a single cable to here, so we have a single network point here. Just because I'm toying with putting my printer in here, because I've got a massive printer, it needs to go somewhere. It's not very nice to have an offices upstairs, so I might stick it in the utility room just to put it somewhere. And even if I don't, I may as well have a network run here just in case. So single network run to the utility here, this is above a worktop, so that's going to go in there. Finally in the utility, there's also a couple of alarm cables. So the reason here is the utility room also has another back door. And this is just in case in the future we ever want to come in and out through the back door. In particular, potentially if we got a dog, for example, you might not want to always take it in the front door if it gets muddy or whatever. So you might want to come in the back door. With the alarm keypad just at the front door and with the way the alarm will be configured, if you were to come in the back door and then walk into the kitchen, the alarm would immediately go off. So my plan here is to install a second alarm keypad here in the utility room, so I can easily come in the back door and unset the alarm from here and then go out into the kitchen. So it just gives me an option to come in and out through the back door. So as before, we've got a network connection there, and we've got another door contact connection that comes all the way up here to here, and this is going to be a door contact cable, so that will come down onto the door somehow and I'll install a door contact. It won't be the neatest thing in the world. It's going to have to kind of come out the ceiling there because there was wood in the corner, it won't go any closer, and then kind of run down. I might have to do some sort of trunking, I'm not sure. But it's a white cable, it's a utility room, it's not really the biggest deal. I'll put some trunking in or neatly clip the cable up, and then you could landlord special it and just paint over the cable. So yeah, that will be fine. So yeah, that's going to be a door contact on the back door. So that's the kitchen TV in the utility room. We kind of got sidetracked from that, but yeah, we're looking at the kitchen TV. For the power, as we saw earlier, there's that twin and earth in the bathroom. That's coming from this point here, so I'll put a fuse spur here, come off that socket into that, and then that'll feed power over to the TV. And then all that's left in the kitchen is going to be some ceiling speakers. So there's going to be a couple of ceiling speakers down this side of the room above the TV, and another couple of ceiling speakers over towards the kitchen end above the kitchen area. So what I've done is, as before, these cables are run up and sitting coiled up in the ceiling, so I can easily pull these down whenever I need them. Additionally, for this area of the kitchen here, I'm also going to pull an access point in, so there's a piece of Cat6A running above here that I can pull down and put an access point somewhere above here. Then the final runway up to downstairs is in the understairs cupboard. So if you remember earlier, I was amazingly able to pull the Cat6 that connects this phone point up to the media panel all the way back out of the living room and drop it down into the garage. So what I've now got is actually 2 Cat6A runs that run behind this phone point. One's connected to the phone point, and one of them I suspect is just coiled up in the back of it and it isn't connected, and both of those run from here all the way back to the garage. And as you can see off the left of that, we have my ONT, so this is absolutely brilliant to have a network run from here to the garage. So what I'll need to do in here at some point is I'll need to take that phone jack off and put a dual network faceplate on there and connect the Cat6 up. But yeah, that's the final run we have to downstairs, is some couple of Cat6 runs to this understairs cupboard hidden behind that phone point. So now here we are upstairs, so we'll start off in the bedroom. This is what we took a look at before. So we now have 3 Cat6As and an aerial connection for a wall-mounted TV. We've then got this back box here for a double socket to power the TV, and as you can see down the back there, I've got where the fuse connection unit is going to go, and it's going to spur off of that socket there to power the TV, so the TV will be installed on the wall up here. Also in the bedroom, just in case it was ever going to be useful, I've run a pair of Cat6As to beside the bed. This does seem a little bit silly, but in my flat I did have a little touchscreen on my bedside table that I use to control smart home stuff. It's not unreasonable that I might have something similar to that, and that might be a power over Ethernet device. It might work with a hardwire connection to the network, so may as well run a couple of cables to beside the bed, just in case that everyone needs some sort of smart home automation displays beside the bed. So yep, a couple of Cat6A runs to there, and that's the bedroom. Next up we have my office, and all I've done is run 2 Cat6As to behind my desk. I saw a lot of people talking about why I'm not running fibre to my desk. Realistically, Cat6A will do 10 gig. None of my video editing requires anywhere near 10 gig, let alone beyond 10 gig. It would just be pointless. And it's an upstairs room, so it is easy enough for me to feed additional cables in the future if I ever did need fibre, but for the very long foreseeable future, this will be fine. A lot of YouTube channels kind of go on about how much crazy network you require for video editing. You really don't. I edit on a laptop, so this is more than sufficient. So yeah, 2 Cat6As to behind my desk. I did also mention that I was going to potentially put another couple of connections at the other side of this room. I've not done that, but I do still want them. The reason I've not run them yet is because that would be quite a good run if I was to ever do a video showing how I run a cable in full depth. So if there's appetite for that, let me know in the comments, because what I could do is I could do a full video showing absolutely every single step for pulling a network cable from the rack and getting it out in my office. So if you're interested in a video of like pulling a network cable in full depth, let me know and I'll do that with that network run. So that's all there is in my office. So now here we are at my partner's office, where we've got a couple of network connections to go behind the desk here. So that's a couple of Cat6A runs to there. And then we've also got these connections here for another TV point. So again, 3 Cat6As and an aerial connection for the TV. And this back box is cut out here for a double socket. I've not run the cables for any of the upstairs power for these extra TVs in yet. I need to figure out the best way to do it because there's a bunch of points up here I need additional sockets. So I'll need to figure out a plan for that. But yeah, there'll be a double socket going in here as well. Next up we have the guest bedroom, nothing fancy in here at all, just another TV point, so 3 Cat6As for the TV, an aerial for the TV, and again another point where I'm going to put a double socket in. Finally upstairs we have my studio, so we've got a pair of network sockets going to go in over here, and then another pair of network points going in here. And then also for my studio, but a little bit weird, I mentioned this earlier, because I'm going to be doing a sort of YouTube backdrop, I don't want to kind of hardwire any connections to the wall that I film against, because that might chop and change and be changed over time. So I've got this cupboard that's directly through the wall from my YouTube studio. So all the cables that are going to go for that wall that I'm going to film against and make a YouTube backdrop, instead I've pulled through into this cupboard. So we've got 3 Cat6As and a TV point for a TV, so the Samsung One Connect box for the TV is going to go in here. I've then got 4 more Cat6As there that I can put into network faceplate and then run additional cables off of that into whatever I do as a YouTube backdrop, and a space up there for a double socket. So essentially all these connections are going to go in here inside a cupboard, and then in the future I can pull these through, extend off of these and do some sort of YouTube backdrop. And it just means that my YouTube backdrop isn't permanently wired into the house. It can easily be chopped and changed, moved around and be plugged into this cupboard here. So that's these additional connections in the upstairs cupboard. So that's a look at all the stuff we've installed in the upstairs rooms. Now let's take a look at how we've run those cables. So as I mentioned, I've got this trunking, so now we can see the trunking is now full of cables. Absolutely packed cables. The one on the right is all data. That's getting pretty full. There's still loads of space in there, but it is pretty full. I'm glad I went for trunking this big. On the left, we've got this one here for all the pink speaker cables, a couple of black coaxes, and then some alarm cable in there as well. That's all going to go up the attic. So what we'll now do is we'll jump up the attic and see what I've done. And here we are up in the attic with an absolutely ridiculous amount of cabling. So as I mentioned earlier, and you'll have seen this before, the cables are all coming up through the trunking here and then running off to either side of the attic. And there's plenty of slack on these, so when I board the attic, I can easily put the flooring in, put the boarding in under these cables, and these can run along the top of the flooring, and I can put some sort of trunking on top of the flooring to allow me to easily access these cables in the future. The cables then run off to the side, they then run up here and into the cable basket. So we've got that on one side. If we go around to the other side, you'll see it's the exact same. The cables run across there, up there, and into cable basket. What then happens is the cables then run along the basket to wherever they need to go, so run along here, and then when they need to drop down into a room, they then run down here like that, branch off, and then drop down to wherever they end up needing to go into the upstairs rooms. So that all those cables going into that cupboard upstairs, that's those cables there, and the cables in my YouTube studio are over there, so they drop down there. So yeah, that's all the cables in. And I'm very happy with how this turned out. The cable basket has made it super easy to pull all these cables in, really easy to manage. If I had to try and clip or cable tie all these cables all the way along, it would have been an absolute nightmare. But with the cable basket, I could just pull the cables up in, hold them all in, put a few zip ties or a few Velcro cable ties wherever I felt necessary, and get a really good end result. So that's all the cables going along towards the front of the house. So we can see we've got some along there, running all the way along to the end. And then the exact same on the other side. They come up there, run along there, and drop down into the various rooms. And then secure the cables when they go down to various rooms. I use those cable tie bases I mentioned earlier, and I've put cable ties around to hold them in. So yes, they're not Velcro cable ties here, fight me, but these are absolutely fine. They're not tight, they're not crushing the cable at all. And using Velcro cable ties this much would just be a complete pain. These aren't going to change very often, so I don't mind using normal cable ties for these. That holds the cables all nice and securely where they drop off into the rooms. But on the areas where the cables are going to be changed potentially, so these runs here where they come up from downstairs, these are using Velcro cable ties, so these can be changed in the future very easily. So yeah, that's all the cable basket up in the attic. Also around the attic, you'll see all these cables hanging down, so these pink ones there, so there's one there, one down at the far end there, and then one over there, one there, and then two more down at the far end. These are for ceiling speakers in the upstairs rooms. Obviously, I've not got the ceiling speakers in yet, that's going to be done in a future video, so all I've done is for each room, I've just left enough slack that realistically the cable could reach the furthest corner of the room, and then when I install the ceiling speaker, chances are I'll use a bit less cable and I can cut off the excess. So all the ceiling speaker cables are already run in, they just are bundled up, hanging off the cable basket so they can be pulled in the future. Same applies to this weird speaker cable here that's kind of hanging off the roof truss. This is just for a speaker on the upstairs landing, which wouldn't really go into any of the cable basket, it wouldn't really need to. It's going to basically be installed like here, so I've just kind of kept the cable up here out of the way so I can find it again in the future, and it'll end up running kind of somewhere down here, so that's what that's doing there. The other two cables that are hanging up here, currently unused, are these two. So we've got an alarm cable here for an upstairs PIR, and then this is a piece of Cat6A for an upstairs access point. So these will drop down through the ceiling somewhere here to install a PIR and an access point. The only other cable I still need to run into the attic is an alarm cable for the outdoor siren, which will be somewhere on the front of the house under there. Unfortunately, I've run out of alarm cable to the really annoying extent where I've got two partial reels, but where combined they would be long enough, but with each separate reel I don't have a long enough continuous bit of cable. So, I mean, I could join it, but I'll just need to go and buy another reel of alarm cable just to do that one run, which is annoying, but well, I'll just need to do that. But yeah, that's everything installed up in the attic. It definitely seems completely over-engineered to do it this way, but I am very happy with the end result. The final thing I'd like to talk about is damage. Because when you're doing a project like this, you're going to have to cut holes into walls, damage things that you'll then later need to patch. It's basically inevitable. So I thought what I would do is I would just show you all the little bits of damage around the house that I'll need to patch. And to be honest, I'm very happy with how little there actually is. So the first bit is in my studio, so we've got this bit here where I had to drill through a noggin to run the network cable down. This serves both a network point in my studio and a network point in my office on the other side of this wall, so I was able to kind of kill two birds with one stone with this one hole. But as you can see, we've got a hole in the wall, bit of plasterboard only patched in there to repair that hole. Not the end of the world, that'll be very easy to patch, and at least I was able to kind of kill two birds with one stone and get two different rooms pulled through one hole in the wall. The only other major hole in the wall is this one here in the downstairs hallway, and this was for pulling in those two cables for behind the couch. So the rear speakers and the sub cable, I just had to drill through this noggin, so I had to cut this hole out again. Again, a little bit annoying, but nothing too major to fill. The final hole in the wall is the one we showed before in the downstairs bathroom. I was originally obviously planning on expanding this out to fit the recessed box for the TV, which is why it's kind of cut here, but that's not going to work. So instead I'll just install the sockets on the wall somewhere here and then patch this hole. This won't be as big a deal because there will be a couple of bathroom cabinets in front of it, but I still want to patch it properly because the last thing you want to do is not patch it or bodge it, put cabinets in front of it, forget about it, and then years down the line you take the cabinets off the wall and find a hole in the wall. So yeah, that's the final hole in the wall we need to patch. So to be fair, 3 holes in the wall for this entire project is pretty good going. The only other damage that's going to really need to be filled in is these little holes in the ceiling all over the place. So I showed this earlier, and it's basically where I've got, say, a pair of sockets, and I directly identify the middle of one of these sockets up in the attic, so I can definitely drill down in the right place. What I like to do is just drill a really small 3mm drill bit right above the socket, straight up through the ceiling into the attic, and then when I'm in the attic I can easily see where that hole's come through and very accurately drill down. And this is one of those bits of damage that I would rather do this than not do it, attempt to measure or guess, and accidentally shoot a drill bit out through the ceiling because I mismeasured. So with these, yes, there's little holes in the ceiling above a few of the points, but these are tiny little 3mm holes and they'll be very easy to fill. So there's a few of these all around the place, but these will take absolutely no effort to fill at all. The final bit of damage I do obviously need to point out is all the holes in the floor. So as you can see, there's holes in the floor absolutely everywhere. You've seen them throughout this video, more in that cupboard there. But as I demonstrated previously, these are very easy for me to patch. So the way these are done is they're kind of little plugs that fit in the hole. There's a rim around the hole, and I can very easily drop that back down, put that in the hole, and completely fill it. If you want to see how I made these, check out my previous video because I go into full detail demonstrating how I made these, but realistically the holes in the floor aren't a problem at all. These plugs can very easily be left in the floor, covered over with carpet, and then if I never need to get access in the future, I can pull the carpet back and lift the plugs out. Now, to stop them rattling around, I might fix these in place just by screwing a wooden batten across the back and then putting a couple of screws through the chipboard just to screw it to the batten. Just stop them moving around. Under carpet, it's probably not a big deal, but with the vinyl floors I'm putting in some of the upstairs rooms, that's vinyl plank flooring, it's a bit sensitive to the subfloor, so I might try and put some sort of, just try and secure this in place. Some of them I might put a bit of filler around the side just to make sure it's completely level for the vinyl, but yeah, the holes in the floor really aren't a problem at all. So yeah, that's a look at the overall damage, and to be honest, 3 holes in the wall, a couple of holes in the ceiling, and some holes in the floor that'll be covered by flooring. Really not bad going. So there we go, that was the full cabling install in my new house. And yes, I'm filming this selfies sort of vlog style. It's 20 to 1 in the morning on the day this video is meant to go live. I can't be bothered going upstairs and getting a tripod. But yeah, that's it all done. So when I got all these cables run into the garage, running throughout the house, it has been an absolute ton of effort. I think I underestimated how much time this would take. This has been by far the biggest project I have ever done. This has been so much effort, but it's worth it. So I'm so glad I got all these cables in, and I can't wait to get all these terminated. It's been a lot of effort, but it's going to be a good end result. So yeah, that's all for this video. So I've sort of shown pulling all the cables in, and then in the next video, we're going to start terminating all these. So we're going to get patch panels in the rack, get all these jacks all terminated, get speaker connections terminated, get all the faceplates installed in all the rooms, and then we'll test them all out. And then in that video, we'll also finally connect all the rack up, get the network kit installed in the rack, and I'll finally have a wired network after far too long. But yeah, that's going to be a fun future video, but all I have to say now is thank you very much for watching.